have you heard this saying? And I'm going to start it and you can probably finish it. Desperate times call
desperate measures.
for desperate measures. That's right. So you have heard it. Well, I'll be honest with you, this week has been difficult for me. Not a very productive one. I was very, very distracted. Much of the time I was just not able to pay attention to what I should be doing. Like my work just kind of faded into oblivion. I just unable to focus because of all things that are going on. And I have a feeling that many of you have found yourself in a very similar situation. Probably just overtaken by the events, what's happening, the shock of it. It began last Shabbat, just as we were meeting here. We realized what was happening, because we heard the announcement of Prime Minister of Israel, and so we knew that there was all out war, and we heard early reports, and now here we are. So just like you, I have been going through a whole range of emotions this week, a whole range of emotions, and I know that because some of you I've been in touch with and got a chance to talk to, and I know that we're all kind of going through the same situation. But what happens around us matters. That's what's important for us to understand. When we watch vulnerable people get harassed and get attacked, we just can't ignore it. It doesn't matter who, but when it's Israel, it hits home really hard. And we watch it and we can't help it. So experiences like this make us hurt and make us ache on the inside. And then we may have a sense of overwhelming sadness. And that sadness can very easily turn into anger. And that's what happened to me this week. So just full confession. My sadness turns to anger. I became angry. Anger is quite a normal reaction. It's what happens with us. We're emotional human beings. But it's what we do with that anger. That's what matters the most. That's what I want you to think about this morning. That's what makes the difference. Especially in desperate times. So Bereshit, Genesis, chapter 4, tells the story of two brothers, Cain and Hevel. They grew up outside of the paradise. They were not in the garden. They were quite different. Hevel kept flocks and Cain farmed. That much we know about them. We don't know much more about their lives. One day, both of them brought a gift to the Lord, an offering to Hashem. And the story goes that God accepted Hevel's offering and rejected Cain's. At least that's how the story is usually being told. And some Bibles may say that God favored Hevel's offering, but not Cain's. And that would be a little bit more accurate, but it would be even more accurate if we actually looked and saw what the Torah actually says. And what the Torah actually says in Genesis chapter 4, verse 4, it says, Vayisha Adonai al Hevel ve'al minchato. Literally, Hashem looked at Hevel and at his gift. He looked at it. He looked first at the gift giver, and then he looked at the offering. And now in verse 5, Torah continues and says, Ve'al Cain ve'al minchato lo sha'a. And upon Cain and upon his gift did not look. God did not look upon him. That's all it was. So it seems like simply God did not pay attention. He paid attention to one gift, but he did not look at the other gift. And Cain, of course, was disappointed because that happened. It says in the Torah, his face fell. And that's obviously an idiom. What it means that he looked down. He looked down to the ground. He was very disappointed. His whole disposition changed. He became sad. But that's not all that happened to Cain. Because after sadness, right here in verse 6, it says also he became extremely angry, it says. It says he became enraged. Vayichar leKain me'od. That means literally, and became hot. He became hot. He began to burn extremely. That's what it says, me'od. Very much so. Cain burned with anger. And Cain went out with his brother to the field, and he murdered him. That was the rest of the story. And we don't quite know and we don't quite understand what happened. We don't really know what's going on in their hearts at that moment. But as I was reading the story, this time my attention was drawn not to the fact that, here's one brother killed another brother. My attention was drawn that Hashem tried to steer Cain away from his anger. Tried to move him away from being so upset and so enraged. Our God is amazing. He's loving. He sees the inside of us and he knows the turmoil that goes on inside of us. And he's actually trying to move us away from those things that can destroy us and destroy others around us. In the Torah we read that God asked Cain why he was so angry. He said, "Why are you so angry?" And Hashem told him that he did actually something good. And he should be able to lift his head. It's a very interesting conversation. It's very one-sided, by the way. See, there's no shame in doing good things. That's what Hashem was telling Cain. What you did was good. You should be able to lift your head because there's nothing that you did that is so wrong. But that's not how Cain felt. He says, if not, the sin is crouching at the door and is desiring. It's desiring Cain, and Cain must master it. That's what Hashem told him to do. That he has a choice, essentially. He had an opportunity to stop the feelings that he had, that anger, because he didn't do anything wrong. There was nothing wrong with that situation, but the way he felt overpowered him. So it's time for us to consider what Hashem is telling us today, here, right now, through the story. And I have a couple of practical points for us. These are very practical application-focused ideas. So as I said, desperate times call for desperate measures. That's what we've always heard. That's what we have said ourselves. But I'm going to say something else to you today. Desperate times call for restraint and control. Cain was extremely disappointed that his gift did not receive the proper attention. Just think about it. Here he brings this gift to Hashem, and Hashem simply did not pay attention. And I'm sure he picked the best produce he had. Cain was a farmer, so that's what he brought, the best of what he had. And his disappointment quickly turned to anger. And that anger could have been controlled. It should have been controlled. But instead, Cain allowed that anger to be, and it grew into evil intentions. And then eventually those evil intentions grew into murder. He did not master his anger. His anger mastered him. Now, Cain did well, as I said, by bringing a gift to Hashem. He brought from the gift of this field. But when it seemed that his brother's gift was preferred, Cain interpreted those circumstances in the most negative way. All it was is that Hashem did not look at his gift. But Cain took the lack of God's attention as rejection. But the question, of course, was Hashem actually rejecting him? That's what we have to think about, and maybe the story can help us see deeper. So my first point is desperate times call for restraint and control. When we feel overtaken by emotion, by sense, by feeling, by wanting to do something, when anger stirs within us and we want to act out, these are desperate times. And that's when we need to exercise restraint and control more than ever. And that's what Hashem was trying to tell Cain. So my second point is this. Desperate times call for faith and trust. Cain became so disappointed over something outside of his control. He can't control if the Lord looks upon his gift or not. That's not something he did. Something Hashem did. Hashem paid attention to his brother and not to his offering. Yet notice that Hashem did not actually reject him. Hashem did not criticize his offering. He didn't put down Cain. He didn't say anything negative or disparaging whatsoever about what has transpired. That is not what happened. That is what Cain might have thought and felt. But that is not what happened. Sometimes you and I and maybe even today, we interpret what happens around us in a very twisted way. We can not see things clearly or straight because of the emotions, sadness, or anger that is within us. And I think that's what happened here. He probably felt rejected, and more specifically, that his brother was more favored. That was perhaps something that he felt even more so, is the fact that not that he was rejected, but that his brother was accepted. And so Hashem saw Cain's disappointment, and he came to him. When he came to him, he came to comfort him. And he spoke to him in wisdom, directly to Cain. And Cain, I could gather that he was desperate for God's attention. He wanted God's favor. He wanted him to accept his sacrifice. And the truth is that he had God's favor this whole entire time, only he didn't see it. Because his anger, his emotion, clouded absolutely everything. And that is how we are sometimes. Sometimes our emotion, our anger, our feelings, they cloud the reality of the situation. And we cannot see things straight. And we twist it into something. And we allow that anger to take over to the degree that we lose control. But faith and trust is what's required in desperate times like this. So, by the way, as God spoke to Cain, Cain did not speak to God about how he felt. He said nothing. You read the words of the Torah. Hashem is speaking to him, giving him direction, advice, and wisdom. Cain did not say, Lord, I feel that you didn't look upon my offering. Why? He did not ask him questions. He expressed nothing. Nothing came from Cain. He came up with his own answers. He came up with his own reasons to explain what happened. He could have asked Hashem, why did you not look at my gift? And he probably would have received an answer, but he didn't. Now I want us to think about the feelings right now that we have in these desperate times. Are we avoiding speaking to Hashem? Are we making our own conclusions, our own decisions? Are we driven by our own emotions at this time? Whatever those emotions may be, and I realize they shift all the time. I believe that, if anything, this passage teaches us today that we should trust Hashem's love and never doubt and become envious of someone else being looked upon in a more favorable way. That happens around us all the time. As we look at the world, we just realize how unfair it is. So I'm reminded right now the words of Shaul, I believe in a letter to Romans. He said that we're supposed to resist these kinds of feelings, and we're supposed to defeat sin and anger. We're supposed to not give in to it. How many times has he taught his disciples these things? And I think in desperate times like that, we need this sort of advice the most. So yes, desperate times, they call for desperate measures, but they also call for restraint and control. They call for faith and trust.